I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a New York Times op-ed piece by former President Jimmy Carter calling on President Obama to formally recognize a Palestinian state before he leaves office this coming January. President Carter writes in part that President Obama must, quote, grant American diplomatic recognition to the state of Palestine, as 137 countries have already done, and help it achieve full United Nations membership. Well, in a recent edition of In the News here on JBS, Alan Dershowitz expressed the fear that during President Obama's last lame duck months in office, he might push for Palestinian statehood in the United Nations. Alan also reiterated the importance of encouraging the two parties, Israel and the Palestinian Authority, to work out a two-state solution in direct negotiations, which many argue would be undermined were the United Nations to formally declare the existence of a Palestinian state anywhere on the West Bank. So how does Alan Dershowitz respond to President Carter's op-ed piece? And I will remind you that Alan was very vocal in his criticism of President Carter's 2006 book entitled Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. Well, we're so happy to have Alan on our phones once again to talk about the New York op-ed piece by Jimmy Carter. Alan, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. I mean, if there were a Nobel Prize for hypocrisy, I think it would go to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is the reason there is no peace now between Israel and the Palestinians. When President Bill Clinton and Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak offered the Palestinian statehood, 95% of the West Bank, all kinds of other good things, a return of some refugees, recognition of Palestinian rights in Jerusalem. The person who told Arafat not to accept the deal was Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter said to Arafat, he was advising him at the time, you will be killed if you accept this deal. Don't do it. So the reason there have been deaths, 4,000 of them in the Intifada following the rejection of the Camp David and Taba offer, and why there's been no peace for the last 15 years is Jimmy Carter. And he doesn't mention that, nor does he mention once in the article Palestinian terrorism, that you would be rewarding terrorism. But the deepest flaw in the article is this. It would guarantee that there would never be a two-state solution because it will take the Palestinians away from the bargaining table. It would say to them, you don't have to bargain face-to-face with Israel. Just ask Jimmy Carter. Ask Barack Obama. They'll give you a state. Well, Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter can't give the Palestinians a state. Only direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians can result in statehood. That is American policy. That's been American policy for years. That was American policy when Jimmy Carter was president. But he's now out of office, and he's now trying to influence policy in a negative way. Because if the Palestinians get recognition from the United States, they have no incentive to go to the bargaining table. They will falsely believe that they can get a state without the kinds of painful compromises that are required when you have a negotiated resolution. Painful compromises both on the part of the Israelis and on the part of the Palestinians. So this is a dumb article, a nasty article, a hypocritical article, an article that is against the prospects of peace and should be rejected by President Obama and all thinking people.
Okay. Now, you remember you were prescient on our last meeting on JBS, and you said you were worried that maybe something would happen that would move Obama to recognize a state. Do you fear that in any way Carter's piece will be influential with him?
I hope not. Carter is reviled and hated by many in the Democratic Party. I know that Bill Clinton has nothing good to say about him because Bill Clinton feels that Carter undercut him at Camp David and Taba. I've never seen any suggestion that Barack Obama has anything but contempt for Jimmy Carter. He's a contemptuous person. He is a person who believes that somehow arrogantly he can do what other presidents couldn't do. He was a failed president. I'm very happy he lost his second term. I mistakenly voted for him when he ran for the second term, didn't realize what a terrible human being he is. He has in his soul deeply anti-Semitic views. When he was a Sunday school teacher, he would teach anti-Semitic views to students. He was a racist when he was the governor. When he ran for governor, he talked about black voters voting in a block and voting against him. He is not a good person. And I would hope that President Obama would see that. There are some people who say, well, he's an old man, he's recovered from cancer, let's do him a favor. No, this isn't doing him a favor. This will end the peace process. This will mean that the status quo will last for years. Now, I'm in favor of the two-state solution. Mm-hmm. I'm in favor of there being a Palestinian state after a compromise resolution and painful compromises on both parts, but I'm not in favor of rewarding Palestinian terrorism by giving them statehood. By the way, he's so naive and so dumb. Who is he going to give statehood to? The Palestinian Authority? To Hamas in Gaza? He's, of course, played footsie with Hamas in Gaza and refused to condemn them in terms that they should be condemned. He's called, Israel apartheid. He has given us no guidelines for what a Palestinian state would look like. What borders would it have? Return to the 67 lines? No Israeli government would do that. 242, which I played a small role in helping to draft back in 67, didn't contemplate a return to the 1967 lines. So in addition to being nasty and malicious and hypocritical, his proposal is also extremely dumb and unlikely to result in anything positive. So I would hope the world would reject it as they have rejected him as a peacemaker. He is not a peacemaker. He is somebody who hates Israel. He is somebody who adored Yasser Arafat and said he never met an Israeli prime minister that he liked. He has a deep, deep-seated bias against anything Jewish, including the nation-state of the Jewish people. He's a despicable human being.
Okay. Now, what about the fact that you said that you are concerned what might happen in the last few months of President Obama's term vis-a-vis?
I am concerned. I'm concerned that it will be taken to the UN. I'm concerned that there are those in the administration who might say, gee, this is a good idea. Maybe we ought to accept Jimmy Carter's proposal. I don't know what Ben Rhodes is going to advise the president. I don't know what others will advise the president. I just don't know, and we'll have to wait and see. I don't know what the State Department will say. I doubt that they would want to see unilateral recognition without any compromise, without any compromise on the part of the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And this puts the entire blame for the stalemate on Israel. Yes. Israel, of course, has said over and over again they're willing to have negotiations with no preconditions, and the Palestinians have had preconditions. Also, Jimmy Carter lies about the facts. He lies about the numbers. If you take seriously his numbers of how many people live in Palestine under Israeli military control, it includes all the people who live in Jerusalem, and includes the people in the areas of the West Bank like Ramallah that there's no military control. I've been to Ramallah. You don't see a single Israeli policeman because there are none there. You don't see a single Israeli soldier because there are none there. They live under the civilian authority, the Palestinian Authority. So, Jimmy Carter is a liar and somebody who's not interested in peace. He's just interested in having his way, which is a way that promotes the Palestinian cause over the nation-state of the Jewish people.
All right, Alan, the last time you were here, last time we spoke, you said many things that piqued people's interest. You were adamant that Democrats who supported Hillary Clinton should now give Donald Trump a chance to prove himself as president, and that Donald Trump was, in your words, everybody's president. Many people, however, were horrified that Mr. Trump chose the founding editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, Steve Bannon, to be his chief strategist. Mm-hmm. What's been your response to the Bannon appointment?
Well, I don't like it. I think Bannon has shown bigotry toward Muslims and toward women, but I don't think he's an anti-Semite. Mm-hmm. Look, compare Bannon's record on anti-Semitism with Jimmy Carter's. It's not even close. Bannon, I've seen no evidence to support any claim that Bannon is an anti-Semite, that doesn't mean he's qualified to hold high office in the White House. I think his bigoted views on other issues disqualify him, and I think it's a bad appointment. I wish it were withdrawn. But the president has the right to pick his own staff, and we have the right to criticize those picks.
Mm-hmm. Another pick, Jeff Sessions for Attorney General. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think Jeff Sessions and Keith Ellison pose very similar problems. They both have had real problems of racism in their past. Jeffrey Sessions has said things that he now regrets. Ellison claims that when he worked together with Farrakhan, he didn't realize Farrakhan was an anti-Semite or an anti-American. I mean, Farrakhan's the most anti-American political orator in the country. And for Keith Ellison to say he didn't know that, but, they both claim to have made tshuva. Both Sessions and Ellison say what they said and did in the past were mistakes. We should forgive them. I think the same standards have to apply to both. But, of course, they don't. Democrats are saying, Keith Ellison is wonderful, there's no problem, but Sessions is terrible. Republicans, many of them, are saying Keith Ellison is terrible, but Sessions is wonderful. You have to have a single standard. They both have made very serious forays into bigotry in the past, and they both claim to have changed that approach now. We have to look at their whole record. Sessions' record on civil rights is not particularly great, and Keith Ellison's record on Israel is abominable. He wouldn't vote for allocations of resources for the Iron Dome. I mean, what could be a more defensive military weapon than the Iron Dome? But he didn't vote for that. He's been kind of J Street down the line. And so I think there are real questions. Also, I think the Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot by picking him to be the head of the DNC, because he's the last guy who will bring back the Rust Belt blue-collar voters into the fold of the Democrats who lost these voters in this most recent election. So I think it's also a dumb decision to pick him. But he and Sessions have to be judged by the same standards.
Okay. I've heard people argue. I heard William Smith, an African-American who worked with Sessions in the Senate, point out that Sessions prosecuted the head of the KKK and went for the death penalty, helped to desegregate the schools of Alabama, made sure a Congressional Medal of Honor went to those who marched in Selma, and hired the first African-American chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
On many issues relating to civil rights. But the same thing can be said about Ellison. People who know him well say he's wonderful, he's not an anti-Semite, he's changed. So again, same standard has to apply to both.
Okay,
You can't believe one and not the other. You can't ignore one's past history and not the other. You have to apply a single standard.
Okay, I appreciate what you're saying. The only thing that I don't understand is that with Sessions, we're talking about something that was said 30 years ago, and he denies it. What you're talking about in terms of Ellison is very recent American history.
No, it's not so recent. It was when he was, it was about 20 years ago, before he ran for Congress.
That's when he voted against the Iron Dome?
No. The Iron Dome is comparable to Sessions voting against civil rights. But Sessions' foray into bigotry with Farrakhan is old, just the way Sessions' foray into bigotry with the Klan or whatever is old. So I think we have two comparisons. We have what they said in the past and what they've done currently. And they both have, very mixed records.
Okay. You've also expressed a number of times your concern that the far left may be too accepting of the Palestinian claims and of the BDS movement. And again, it seems to me that one of the things that Ellison represents is that wing of the Democratic Party. And I'm surprised they would pick someone that far left. Any comment?
Too. I think it's a big mistake. They didn't lose the left in this election. They lost the center.
Right.
They lost blue-collar, Rust Belt center people, and that's who they need. I wish Joe Biden would take the job.
Yes.
He would be great. Or Granholm, the former governor of Michigan, would take the job. She'd be great. But this guy is about the worst possible choice to be the head of the DNC at a time when the Democrats are trying to regain middle-class, middle American, blue-collar workers, union members, that kind of thing.
Okay.
This guy stands exactly as the opposite of who the Democrats need at this point.
Okay. You're also watching, as we all are, the way in which Trump's cabinet is unfolding. So there's
Yeah.
a big controversy over Secretary of State Mitt Romney, Rudy Giuliani, and General Petraeus. Do you have any feelings about any of those three?
Well, I know both Romney and Giuliani. They're both extremely well qualified. They're very different people. Romney is more of a statesman. Giuliani is more of a kind of activist. I do think the State Department, Secretary of State, has become one of the least important positions in government these days because foreign policy is largely determined in the White House. And so I think if Romney were to get the appointment, that's the last you'd hear from him in the last 4 years. It would almost be as if Trump were punishing him for what he said about him by putting him in Foggy Bottom, where nobody hears from you again, and you're just traveling around the world as a glorified messenger. I think if Giuliani got it, he'd be very tough because he'd have the president's ear, and he'd be a very activist Secretary of State. As far as Petraeus is concerned, if he got it, you imagine the hearings for confirmation with the same people who were complaining about Hillary Clinton's alleged misuse of classified information would have a ball, pointing to the hypocrisy of the Republicans appointing somebody who pleaded guilty to misuse of classified information. So I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay. I hear people say that Giuliani is a very bad man. What do you say?
I've known him for years. He's a decent guy, a very smart guy. I can tell you I've had many negotiations with him, and his handshake was always good. He always complied with what he said he would do. I've worked with him together. We've been on opposite sides of issues and on the same side of issues. He's a very decent, good guy, very supportive of Israel, very supportive of Jewish values. So you're not going to get me to say negative things about Rudy.
Okay. Now, what you have been very critical of Jill Stein. What's your opinion of Mrs. Clinton joining in a call for a recount in 3 states?
Well, she didn't really join in the call. What happened is her lawyers have said, we will participate. And I think it's perfectly within the rules. I don't think it's going to get anywhere. I think Jill Stein has gotten more publicity from this than she did during the several times she's run for president or governor. She's not a good person. She favors the BDS movement. She's very anti-Israel. She's a self-hating Jew, and I have nothing but contempt for her as a political figure. I knew her by reputation because she lived in my area of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she always had an awful reputation. But now, she's doing a deed which many people support, and certainly have shown their support by sending her more money for this than they did when she was running for president.
Mm-hmm. You do not believe, however, in the recount?
No, I think recounts are permitted under law, and when they're permitted under law, it's perfectly okay to do it. I don't think it's going to get anywhere. I think there are better ways to spend one's time. I mean, if I had been asked to participate as a lawyer in the recount, I would have said no. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to get us anywhere. I think, Trump is going to be the president.
All right, so Alan, we're speaking shortly after the death of Fidel Castro. A controversy has evolved over how one should now view Castro. President Obama sent his condolences to the Cuban people, which seem to have outraged American Cubans, many of whom lost family members to Castro's torture, imprisonment without trial, and murder. How do you assess the political career of Fidel Castro?
Well, I would say it's very negative. He's like so many other tyrants of the 20th century. He didn't believe in due process or dissent or human rights. He was a Stalinist and deserves to be treated as a Stalinist. History will judge whether his revolution achieved good or bad for the people of Cuba. That's different than judging him as a person. Him as a person is somebody who should have been put on trial in the International Criminal Court and put in jail for the rest of his life for what he did, for his violation of human rights. He was one of the greatest tyrants of the 20th century.
Did any part of President Obama's message after his death bother you?
Yes. I think it should have been a tougher message. This is a man who should have died in prison. Mm-hmm. And instead he died, glorified by his people. That's understandable, but he should not be glorified by presidents who support human rights. The negative should have been clearly highlighted. Mm-hmm. You can convey condolences to family members. You know, whatever he would have done for Stalin, he should have done for Castro. People
Yes.
on the hard left glorify Stalin today, but he deserves no glorification. And I think you judge people not by what good might have been accomplished, but by the means they used to accomplish what might or might not be good. And judged by the means he used, obviously, Castro belongs in the jail cell of history.
All right, we only have a moment or two left. I want to follow this up. There are many American Jews, Americans in general, who like President Obama personally very much. He's a
I do.
fabulous,
I like him personally. Yeah.
Fabulous orator, inspiring, charming, good-looking, classy. At the same time, many have been terribly disappointed with his foreign policy.
I'm in that camp, very much so.
Okay, and that in some way, the contrast that we've seen between his response to Castro's passing and that of Trump's response reflect an unease people have. I want you to assess for me, from your perspective, how will President Obama be remembered, not in terms of domestic, but in terms of foreign policy?
Well, I think his domestic policy will get high grades, but I think his foreign policy will get very low grades. I think his greatest failures were when he established a red line for the use of chemical weapons, and then when the red line was clearly crossed, he withdrew it and destroyed American credibility, opened up an area for the Russians to come in, didn't do enough in Syria, handled Iraq badly. I think particularly in the Middle East, his foreign policy has been a disaster, and he will be badly remembered. The Iran deal, it'll depend on whether Iran ever develops nuclear weapons. If it does, he'll be the Neville Chamberlain of the 21st century. If he manages to stop Iran, or if the United States manages to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons, then history will judge him differently. I have an op-ed coming out in the next few days talking about how Trump ought to enforce the Iran deal by making sure that the preliminary part of the deal is enforced. And that says that Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to develop, obtain, or secure nuclear weapons. If Trump can manage to do that, he will, I think, save Obama from the trash bin of history, where he may end up if Iran develops nuclear weapons as the result of this deal.
Mm-hmm. In general, as you look at how Trump has behaved since his election, how do you evaluate it?
Well, I'm worried. I'm worried that he is not presidential. I'm worried that he continues to tweet foolish things like trying to take away the citizenship of people who burn flags, or claiming that he actually won the popular vote if you just discount all the illegal people who voted. I mean, that's not particularly presidential. I would hope that once he sits in the Oval Office, he will become more presidential, but that's a hope not based on facts as I've currently seen them.
Okay. I conclude by going back for one moment to Carter's piece. Alan, we've spoken many times, and you've described many times, and I think I have it right, how you offended your mother when many, many years ago you took a public stand against Israel's building settlements on the West Bank.
Civilian settlements on the West Bank, yeah. And the rabbi in my shul, the Young Israel of Borough Park, called me a traitor to the Jewish people for denying Jews the right to live in Yehuda and Shomron.
Okay.
I don't think we should deny them the right to live there as long as it's done as part of a negotiation. I think the settlements that are there should stay, and there should be a negotiated resolution. But Jimmy Carter is going to make that impossible if his absurd plan for recognizing Palestinian state without there being any negotiation with the Israelis is put into action.
Okay, I do want you to comment, though, on this. In his op-ed piece, President Carter says that settlements have been constructed, quote, illegally on Palestinian territory. Alan, is there anything illegal about Israel's building settlements on the West Bank, and to what extent do you agree that West Bank is legally Palestinian territory?
Well, I think it's disputed. I think there are legal arguments on all sides of that issue. I think it's a policy mistake for Israel to be building settlements way deep into the Palestinian area, which I hope will become part of a Palestinian state. I think the legal issues are clouded and difficult, and I don't think one should say unequivocally that they're illegal, and I think they should be subject to negotiation.
Alan, I say it over and over again, no one's like you. I am always so impressed by your willingness to say how you speak what you feel and you call it as you see it. You have made a major contribution, not simply to the Jewish world, but to America as a whole. I'm honored you give me time when I need you, and I thank you very, very much.
Well, I thank you. You always ask me good questions, and you're always on topic, and I appreciate and enjoy being on your show.
Thank you, Alan.
Be well. Bye.
The thoughts of Alan Dershowitz, former law professor at Harvard Law School and author of Electile Dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters. And as Alan has said, it was prescient. What a prescient title. There were many unaroused voters in our last presidential election. I find the op-ed piece by President Carter highly offensive, objectionable. Alan was very, very muted. In many ways, Alan was not muted at all. But when it came to the issue of President Carter calling the West Bank Palestinian territory and West Bank settlements illegal, he is repeating a canard that is said over and over. It is a lie. There's nothing illegal about Israeli settlements. They may be unwise. They are not illegal. And the land between the Jordan River and the 1947 armistice line is no more Palestinian territory than is the land from that 47 line to the Mediterranean Sea. To the Palestinian, there's no difference in quality or character between the line to the west of the west, to the west of the line, or to the east of the line. The West Bank is no more or less Palestinian land to the Palestinians than is the land inside the land of Israel. And for President Carter and for other professors of Middle East history to refer to the West Bank as Palestinian territory, please understand it is a lie. And it's the old saw, if you say a lie often enough, the people ultimately come to believe it. I don't care what people believe. I do care what the viewers of JBS understand to be the truth. The truth is, the West Bank is, as Alan Dershowitz said, disputed territory, and the only way it'll ever be resolved is if the Palestinians are one day willing to give up all their claims on the State of Israel, to recognize the legitimacy of the Jewish State of Israel, and to live in peace alongside the State of Israel as Canada lives with the United States. My thanks as always to our director Sloan Copeland, production coordinator Serge Goldberg, to JBS's associate director Dara Golub, editors Dennis Golan and John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.